The Queens District Attorney's Office was officially formed on February 12th, 1796. Its first district attorney was Nathaniel Lawrence. Today, Melinda Katz holds the position. The Queens DA's office holds jurisdiction over all of Queens County and its 2.2 million inhabitants. The DA's office prosecutes everything from DUIs, petty larcenies, and misdemeanors to severe crimes like homicide, rape, and human trafficking. Over the course of the internship, we were exposed to several other offices in the criminal court system. I spent 6 weeks in the Criminal Courts Bureau, where we prosecute misdemeanor cases that cannot lead to more than 1 year in prison. Due to the pandemic, college interns were given restricted access to the court system, so instead, these two ADAs, Sarah Arambayev and Chris Theodoro, will give you a detailed look into the life and times of the Criminal Courts Division. So, the first question is, how are policies communicated to you through the chain of command?
So, chain of command is kind of the way it goes generally. The DA will form a policy, something that she wants to see instituted, but it's a little more vague. And then I guess she talks it over with people that are close to her, people that are in executive positions. They formulate ways to basically enact those policies. And then through word of mouth, email, and meetings that we'll have on a weekly basis, those chain of command policies flow downward from the top. So that's generally how it's done.
How do you guys express your reactions to policy changes and proposals that are issued to you from above, or do you have the ability to do that?
I feel like we do. I mean, if it's just like a general broad policy on how the DA wants us to handle cases that are coming in, there's not much room for, like deviating from that way. But if we have like more efficient ways of carrying out those policies, it's definitely an open conversation with our direct bosses on, how to more efficiently carry out those policies if we have like just better ideas, just because we're the ones actually handling the cases. So we're touching them on like a daily basis. So if we have better ways of doing it, like it's definitely like an open conversation.
Yeah, so chain of command basically too is a big one there. It's if we have a problem with something, we go to our bosses directly above us, and if they see their faults in the policy or something like that, they will then go a step above themselves and try and institute some change. So most of the time, policy flows downward and response to policy flows upward.
Yeah, like working out the kinks, because it's like a theoretical idea of what they want, but actually carrying it out, we're the ones doing it. So if we see that there are issues that are coming up that like maybe, they didn't like foresee, we'll tell our bosses, and then, it kind of just goes up the chain.
All right. Over the course of the pandemic, things have really slowed down in the office. So the interns had a lot of downtime, which we used to ask you guys if you had any corrob calls for us to do. But what did the ADAs do? Are there discretion areas, and how do you generally use your time in the office, especially during the pandemic?
So it was definitely a good time to, really go through each case one by one. The 30-30 clock was stopped, so that gave us a chance to really, call all our victims, see what they want to do, see if they want to go forward, see what paperwork is needed. So we really had a good amount of time to just go through all the cases and, see what documents, what paperwork is missing, how we can further the investigation and things like that.
Yeah, that seems to be mostly what we did. Obviously not as busy as normal, because normally there's court involved, but
yeah,
we did more of the victim outreach side and communications with defense attorneys.
Right.
So generally, when the courts are operating, you guys do less victim outreach, but there's also a lot more to the court system. So if the courts were open, what would your date look like?
So if courts were open, we're on a rotating schedule. So, we'd have a representative from like our part be in court all day, standing up on all of our cases. And, the rest of us would either, be at our desks, like doing, paperwork, doing discovery, calling victims. If one of us had a hearing that was going to happen, the court representative will, call us or text us, say, hey, like, your hearing is going to happen, like, go to this courtroom. So, we have one person in court representing all of our cases, while the others are, at our desks, doing
Prep.
the paperwork,
Yeah.
prep, and all that stuff. And it's a rotating, so it's one day I'll do it, the next day Chris will do it.
And I think there's about 5 of us now, so it's like once a week or
Yeah.
twice a week sometimes.
All right, that's pretty cool. In the workplace, generally, the people have sort of slang or jargon that you use. What are some of your favorite bits of slang and jargon used around the office?
We have a lot. Like a supporting deposition, we'll call that a karab.
It's true. I'm trying to think.
What's a burg?
A
burg is a burglary, yeah,
like
yeah.
a rob.
Yeah.
A DWI or a DWI. Intox, it's like intoxicated. It's literally just like abbreviations.
It's all
of, like, the
abbreviations for
words.
crime words, yeah,
Can't
for the
think of
most part.
any.
I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah. For the most part, it's just legal words that we knock down a peg because we don't want to say the
The
full
whole world,
5
yeah.
syllables or something like that.
Just lazy.
Yeah.
So in communications, do you guys put that into emails, or do you actually write out the whole word? Like if it's a burglary, would you write to your boss, "We have a burg," or do you write, "We have a burglary"?
Probably depends on the
It
context
depends on the
of the email.
boss. It depends on the email. Depends on the boss. If it's just like a regular question about a case, you can write burg and like they'll get it.
Also, sometimes there's joke emails too that get
Yeah.
sent out, and those ones you may see the word burg.
I wouldn't say that the abbreviations are like disrespectful. You know what I mean? Or like not professional.
Right.
So you can definitely put that in an email, and you definitely still sound professional.
Yeah, it depends on the context though.
Yeah.
Do you guys interact often with police officers?
All the time. All the time. This is like a second home for police officers. It's actually really weird that they're not.
They haven't
in
been here for the
hallway.
entire time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
No,
normally,
I saw my first officer yesterday in the hall, and I'm like, "What are you doing here? Like, are you allowed in here?"
and I think we've been doing this for almost 2 years now, and after that much, you start to identify and know there's probably thousands upon thousands of officers in Queens, and you become first name basis friends with some of them, and
Definitely.
you recognize names, you recognize who's a good officer, who doesn't get their paperwork in on time, who
Yeah.
sometimes might be lazy.
Like a good, like a cop that like his investigation is thorough. You
Yeah.
know, like you definitely build a solid relationship with officers. So we work together, but we don't work for each other. You know, so they
Yeah.
do the investigation, we'll get the case, we'll prosecute the crime, and any discrepancies, any issues. It's important to develop that rapport with them. Because you tell them like, hey, listen, why didn't you do this when you should have done that? Like, why didn't you do this when you should have done that? And you really wanna like teach them, but then also you don't wanna like knock them because they are actually on the field, running around doing everything. So it's kind of like a very mutual relationship where like you want to have an open communication with them. But yeah, officers are here all the time.
All right. Well, that's also kind of weird for me to picture because I haven't seen any of them other than the ones sitting outside sometimes.
Yeah, if you were here like during normal times, like there would be
It's a
like
parade.
5
It's a
cops
line of
here,
them,
just
yeah.
like prepping with that ADA, prepping with that AD, prepping with me, like just getting documents, reviewing body cam footage because they, these cases drag out for like sometimes a long time, and they forget. So we review the body cams with them. There's cops just everywhere.
All right. Speaking of reviewing body cams, during the discovery phase, so you're on the clock to get the evidence over to the defense attorney, which means that you have to procure that evidence somehow and then also redact the unnecessary portions and then send it over to the defense attorney. Are there cases, or how often does it happen, in which police officer or police department sometimes doesn't get the paperwork in the proper amount of time, or if they become with the body cam footage, it may take a while to reach you? How has that been changed during the pandemic, if at all?
So because there are like fewer amount of cases, I feel like on intake, which is where the bureau that writes up the arrests, they're the first people to touch the case. They do a pretty good job of like talking to the cop, making sure as much paperwork as he has at that time is given to us. Make sure that he at least writes down all of the officers that were at the scene, and he has to basically chase them to make sure that they share their body cam, that they upload it. So if we know at least the people that were at the scene, like we're able to like get their body cam, so that's not necessarily an issue. But a lot of the work is done on intake.
Probably line share.
Yeah.
All right. So you guys mentioned chain of command earlier and how important it is. So I'm curious, can you draw a line, as it were, from Melinda Katz or from yourself to Melinda Katz? Like, how does the chain of command work? Let's say like who's above you, who's above them, and etc.
It's pretty easy, actually. Yeah, it's pretty well defined because for us, we have our direct part supervisor, who would then report to the bureau supervisor, who would then report to Angela, who's basically like the misdemeanor trial supervisor.
Yeah.
And then from there, she would report to an executive above her, who's like just a general trial supervisor, and then that goes up to yeah.
So it's so there's 3 parts in criminal court: AP 1, 2, and 5. So we have, each part has the part supervisor, and then we have our deputy bureau chiefs, and then we have the bureau chief, and then we have like an executive, and then that executive reports to, I think one more person above her.
Probably Pishoy, yeah.
And
Pishoy, I
then-
think, oversees it.
Yeah, and then Pishoy would go to Melinda Katz.
And there's kind of, I guess, 3 general. So like we're in a trial bureau where we handle trials, and basically trial bureaus are kind of like you're fast paced, like you get a ton of files on your desk and you got to do as good as you can on them. The other side is there's 2 others. It's investigations, where basically you have the task of working up cases and like developing strong ones. Like if you're doing maybe a human trafficking sting and you're getting a wire or something like that, or an economic crime where you're building a case on somebody that does wire fraud or something like that. Like those are investigative cases, and then there's finally appeals, which is the after trial or after case.
Right. Investigative bureaus are like for the most part prior to arrests. They work with cops to build the case, whether it would require a subpoena, search warrant, any of those types of things. And then when you get enough evidence, then they'll make the arrest, and then they'll handle the arrest from that on. For us, we get a case, it's after the arrest, and we'll just, conduct our investigation, and then, we'll prosecute the case. And then appeals is after we have a conviction where the defendant wants to appeal the conviction.
And each of those have their own separate chain of command to people overseeing it. So it all functions in a pretty solid way.
It's a very hierarchical, office.
Recently, there have been changes to the way the procedures are carried out. If you've heard that starting this year, for example, there's a new bail reform, and there was also the new discovery laws. How open generally is the office to change? I don't mean on those 2 issues, but I mean generally to policy changes and procedural changes. How does the group often react to that?
I mean, government work in general is tough because generally it's not like private jobs where a lot of times they have money to be able to rapidly fix things.
Yeah.
Where like a private firms for law generally like got enough money to make rapid advancements. Government, it's generally a little bit slower because we don't have the
funds allocated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it is a little bit slower, and sometimes what you can't do in technological efficiency, you have to make up for in manpower or time, essentially. So it's been a lot harder dealing with those changes because a lot of times
We don't have the technology there yet.
and there's never any. There's obviously, I'll play it nice, but there's never like sufficient funding or preparation. It's just Albany passes a law and then they expect us to do it, and it's more difficult than that.
Yeah, so with respect to actually implementing the policies, I mean, it's law now, so we have to do it. There's not much room for tweaking or anything like that, you know what I mean? Like, there's not that much the DA could actually do to, change the policy because it's now the law. It's just a matter of us now implementing it, which, in the beginning was a little bit difficult because, she had never done this before. So it's just a new change for everybody.
And even people that
even
had done this, all the other district attorneys'
Yeah.
offices in the 5 boroughs, and probably the entire state, all had a difficult time just because, it's changing the way things are done. So it's obviously more
And I
difficult
think
to adapt.
Yeah, and I think in the beginning they were all talking to one another, about just sharing ideas, sharing technology programs, things like that.
Right. So another difference between you guys and the private sector is that in the private sector they have clients, and here you have defendants. So how would you describe your relationship and your opinions toward defendants, especially if you have them for more than one case, or you'll have a stack of their cases that you have to go through. Do you form personal connections with defendants and victims often, or do you just remember their names?
Sometimes. I mean, it depends. I think that one's case by case basis, because you get a nutty guy who goes around, does a bunch of wild crimes, and you'll remember that guy forever. And suddenly you go to trial with him, and he will remember you. And like sometimes you get weird relationships like that, or victims too. Sometimes you get ones that call you up all the time. And yeah, it's the difference between like us and how we have basically we serve the public, and in private they serve a client. So generally we have a more difficult balance to play, where we're not trying to be overly harsh on the defendant, but also at the same time we're not trying to make the victim's suffering trivial. So it's generally a more difficult balance, where we're sometimes you could say caught between a rock and a hard place, but sometimes it's not a question. Sometimes the defendant did a terrible wrong and he should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Or sometimes it wasn't that big of a deal and the victim might be overblowing it a little bit. So that's a balance that we have to play, which puts us at odds with people all the time.
Definitely. I guess it's a good thing that you don't necessarily like represent the victim as like an attorney. Like I say, like I'm not your attorney. I'm just prosecuting the case on your behalf. You again, like Chris said, like you need to be very objective, and the best thing about this job, it really is that you do the right thing. Like you literally go to bed every night not questioning whether or not you did the right thing, because it's literally our job to do the right thing. We have defendants that do what they do because of a drug problem, of mental health problems. So we have the ability, with their defense attorneys to actually get them the help that they need, because like not everybody grew up the same way or in the same type of situations, family wise, just economic wise. So we really have a chance to like help people, but you also have to gauge like what your victim wants too. So you really have to like you sometimes you like split the baby in half. We have people that they got like punched in the face and they're like, okay, I want him to go to jail, but like the guy has no criminal record, so it's like, ma'am, that's not going to happen. This is what's going to happen, and this is what we think is fair for the case. And because you just have the ability of just being objective. That's, I think, like what it is.
All right, excellent, guys. So last two questions. In my experience as an intern, probably my favorite part of the job is doing the corrupt calls, because I get to interact with the victims. And I'd imagine that it gets tedious for you, and it did for me. I called a couple of times, and like they don't pick up, and then they'll call me a few hours later and say I need a prosecutor, and they're all out to lunch. So, but I would say that was my favorite part of the job. For you guys, what would you say is your favorite part of the job?
I just love being in court. It's pretty fun. You never know what's going to go down, and it's kind of like an adrenaline rush, especially if you're doing hearings or trials or whatever. It's kind of like everything is prepped for that, essentially. All this extra crap, redact that, but all this extra stuff is just for the sake of being fully prepared once you go into court. And my personal opinion is I think everyone deserves a trial. It's a shame that you can't go to trial in every single case, because if we had enough resources to be able to do so, I think that would probably be an ideal world, but we don't. It's currently how this plays out, that we allocate and we ration and make sure that people that go to trial, we believe 100% that they deserve to be convicted of whatever crime they committed. But I think trial, hearings, being in court, using case law, thinking on your feet, that's the fun of it.
Yeah. This job, it's like you're performing. Like when you're in court, you are putting on a show for the jurors. You're showing the juror, because you spent like, let's say, a month or two prepping for this case, and you want to show people what you see, the side of the story that you see. So definitely being in court is the best, because you have this, like Chris said, like this rush. Law school kind of beats the public speaking fear out of you. So I guess when you come here, you're ready. That's the best part of the job. The best part of this office is definitely the people you work with. um, total strangers when you meet, but you know you spend so much time together that you become like friends. And even when you leave the office, like we're still keeping in touch. And you know it's definitely like a big camaraderie, and it's a think tank here. You know, I can turn around and say, hey Chris, I have this issue. Have you ever had this issue? You know, what happened in your case? Or you know, and then somebody else will chime in and just say like what the experience they had, or they have this motion that you know you'll let me like use. You know, so it's definitely a big family. Like we're always helping each other, and like you know, even if you don't want to eavesdrop, like you'll eavesdrop on somebody's conversation, then you'll just pop up and say, "Hey, actually, you know, don't mean to eavesdrop, but I had that issue. This is what happened. You know, you could do this." So it's a good feeling. You're not alone. You're not, you know, you always have somebody that's here to help. You know, the supervisors are great. Like they let you do your own thing because you do want to feel like you're an attorney and you have your own discretion. But even if you have a question, like everybody's always willing to lend a hand.
Yeah, that's great. I've noticed that in my time here. Also, there was a group of ADAs in on the other side in crim courts. I had spent time with them earlier, and I could tell that it is a great work environment. And one of the pieces of oftentimes we would discuss because some of them came from corporate law, and they would discuss the differences between working in the private sector as opposed to working here. And the advice that I got out of it was if you want the full wallet but an empty mind, you should go into corporate law. But if you want an empty wallet and a full heart, you come into the DA's office. So my question for you guys is, what kind of advice would you be able to give to somebody who also wants to become an assistant district attorney, or somebody who's in the position of wanting to go to law school but they're not quite sure what kind of law they'd like to practice yet?
That one's a fun one. I mean, I'll let you go first.
No, you go first.
You sure?
Yeah, I'll go after.
It's tough. I generally say try everything. I think there's always a good answer. Try as much as you can, see what you're suited for, and then kind of follow your heart essentially. And if you want to become an ADA, you want to work public servant or whatever, work for the public, make appropriate decisions that lead you to a good law school or an appropriate law school that'll allow you to practice trial advocacy or allow you to go on moot and do appellate work or allow you to do some extracurricular that ties into it, do internships, handle caseloads while an intern or anything like that, and kind of carve out your niche. I think that's probably always the best way. It doesn't. You don't have to know what you're going to do right away too. I was one of those people that did, but there's plenty of people here that
I did.
yeah, exactly. And you still end up here, and you still end up doing probably just as good, if not better, sometimes than people that always knew they wanted to be an assistant district attorney. So it's yeah, you kind of feel it out and just try everything.
My advice also try everything. With respect to first going to law school, you should first figure out if you do want to be an attorney. You know, you don't necessarily have to practice law. You know, you could just have your JD, but you know, law school is tough. It's a lot of work. So you know, if you don't like it, if you don't want to do it, getting through law school is going to be tough. But if you know you want to be a lawyer, you just don't know what type of lawyer, definitely go through law school. Your first year, you're exposed to a breadth of like classes that are just, you know, you have to take those classes, so that'll definitely expose you to you know, the different topics, the different fields. The internships are, you know, great. Like definitely never say no to an opportunity, even if it's not what you necessarily had in mind. Never say no to an opportunity. I thought I was going to do real estate law going into law school, and I'm here. Like this is a job that I didn't even know what this was going into law school. And I'm here, and I'm very grateful. Being an ADA, you have those cases where you really feel with your victims. You know, you really help them. You develop a relationship with them. You keep in touch even after the case is over. Like I have that. I ran into her actually in Astoria recently, and she gave me like the biggest hug, which was the best feeling because you know you really feel like you help people. And here, like you really feel like you help people because people are at their most vulnerable. And that's the best part of being an ADA. You know, it's not a glamorous job. It's not like Law and Order. You know, it's definitely a lot more. It's definitely not what you see on TV, but it's probably the best feeling. Like you have the best feeling going home. You know, these days are tough. You know, you do have tough days where you have like rough days, and you have times where you're working till like 9, 10 o'clock at night, but it's worth it. You know, it's really worth it.
All right, guys, thank you very much for your time and for the advice. And I'm going to send this in to my professor as the interview, and hopefully he'll give me an A.